from the abstract. I'm going to try and make it from the abstract to more real. Okay? Take into consideration the algorithms and what Aurora was referring to, the way things are, with Instagram, with a lot of these platforms, because even like Facebook recently had this whistleblower that was in front of the U.S. Senate accusing Facebook of basically having profits in mind over and above everything else. So, that's no surprise to anyone, because multinational corporations, that's their modus operandi. Now, just to give you an example of how this whole system, from my perspective, works, is like this. Like a long time ago, let's say maybe over 100 years ago or so, someone came up with the idea, because at the time, people that had money, and I won't go into how they got the money to begin with, but people that had money, they would have like a partnerships in order to create businesses, right, or ventures, where they would make, the coal mines or whatever they would build, and then make profits from that and so on, right? But if those ventures failed, they would lose their own personal wealth, not only the investment, but also any creditor could go after their own personal wealth. So they came up with the idea, of, and this makes a lot of sense, of the corporation, right, where your only limited liability is what you put into it, as opposed to your personal effects. So the creditors couldn't go after your own personal effects, even if the company went belly up. And that inspired new ventures, inspired people more and more investments, and that makes relatively good sense in the sense of building an economy. But then something started to happen. Well, because corporations were like that and had some power, in the sense of like it was making profits for people, then, as they grew, the idea grew. And this is an idea from, the gorgeous mind of the human mind. And then what happens is greed came into the picture, where, hey, why can't we get more and more, power for the corporation? This way we'd make more and more money by doing so, right? And because we have less and less limits of what it can do, to the point that with lawyers and so on, the corporation at a certain point became sort of seen or perceived as a person from a legal perspective, having the same rights as a person type of thing, legally in the legal world type of thing. So, again, I'm speaking in general terms. So now the corporation is perceived as a person, has the same rights, and so on, right? So all of a sudden you have these multinational corporations that have this identity, of being considered as people, as persons, legally speaking. The only problem is that, except for a minority of people, okay, human beings have limited ambition in one sense or another. And when I say almost everyone, humans have limited ambitions, meaning like, most of us, if we make $1 billion, we'd say, hey, I have more than enough money to live with for multiple lifetimes, including my kids and so on and so on. So I don't need to make more. There's the ambition sort of diminishes. But there's a few that apparently the ambition is limitless, and that is also what multinational corporations are. They have unlimited ambitions. And actually, that is their modus operandi in the sense from the perspective of Wall Street, or this because their the people that invest in corporations, that buy into them, expect those corporations to keep growing and to keep making more and more profits. Not just on a year, 1 year they make a certain profit and that's cool. No, they have to make more profits than the year before, and so on and so on. Accumulative profits. But so the idea behind it all is that multinational corporations, who are now considered sort of legal persons, have no limits in their ambitions. So they build, obviously, algorithms that are based on the bottom line, which the bottom line, as I mentioned, is profits and growth. That is legally what they are supposed to do, is make profits and growth over and above pretty much everything, as long as they do it legally. And that's it. So that's the whole thing, right? So when I mention to a representative, maybe there's something wrong, or when Aurora says, maybe there's something wrong with the algorithms because they're promoting like the wrong things as opposed to the, let's say, relatively right things, relatively speaking, from the human perspective. Well, they'll obviously, as the subservience of this entity, multinational corporation, they represent, they will disagree with you and say, well, no, it's working fine. We're making more and more money. I'm getting paid. The CEOs are making more and more money. Everybody's making money. Wall Street loves us. So what's wrong? There's nothing wrong. So it's very interesting. This is an entity that was created by human thought, that was taken over by greed, the human emotion of greed, formed into something, an entity like a multinational corporation, which is with the idea of making more and more profits and more money, and more growth, and then having people within it and beneath them, so subservient to the entity that they serve. So all of a sudden, the entity is above the people itself. And we've seen that in different ways, including in the 2008 economic crisis, where the idea of too big to fail came into the picture as well, right? And so the whole system is structured on being subservient to a system that we created and that was taken over by greed, the emotion of greed, the human emotion, and the human condition of greed. So it's interesting that a thought that originated from something relatively innocuous and from the beautiful mind that we have as human beings, but then corrupted by the human condition, which in this case was greed. And then we become subservient to that in which we created, the entity that was created from, that became magnified and became taken over by the emotion of greed. Now, in every circumstance, whatever human, and this is the problem, whatever the human being thinks and tries to resolve a problem, sooner or later it collides with the human condition, and the solution becomes a problem because it is taken over, as I mentioned, by one of the fundamental aspects of the corrupt aspect of the human condition. Now, in most cases, now the natural reaction to this is great. Okay, so what? We're not supposed to be human? How are we going to resolve that, right? And let's come up with organizations. Let's come up with a whole bunch of different things, right, that are going to address the problem. And then those organizations become themselves, in one form or another, let's say, distorted. Okay, And the things never really get completely resolved. Okay, like for example, there's a problem with the unification of the world, right? We came up with the United Nations, and the United Nations, the last thing that seems to be is united. So, and that's again because of the different aspects of human conditions that come into the picture. So what do we do, right? How do we resolve the problem of the human condition? How do we resolve greed? It's part of us, right? How do we resolve envy? How do we resolve jealousy? How do we resolve all these factors that distort every good intention that the human mind is able to come up with, or the human, whatever solutions that we come up with? And that's where it comes back to us, to ourselves, right? If we understand who we are and what we are, from that comes an understanding of what love is. And I'm not talking about romantic love. And if one grasps the fundamental meaning of that, then it becomes sort of the filter in which we see the emotions that are come from within us when something occurs that stimulates those emotions. For example, if greed comes into the picture, it comes through me, then I see it for what it is, through the lens of this understanding of what unconditional love is. And I let it, and I look at it. I look at the greed for what it is. And then as soon as I recognize it, it just passes on. It just goes away. It's because it's been absorbed like a thought, a passing thought that just was harmless at the end, And that's how we can progress. This is a type of quantum leap in our psyche that is necessary in order for the human race to survive itself. Now, that is easier said than done, because finding the love that I'm referring to is enlightenment, and that is could be a very difficult and long struggle for many people, because it's so far away from our everyday lives. Yeah, so that's so the real issue for me, what I see, is how does that revolution, that psychological revolution occur? And that's why I wrote I wrote my book, just to sort of point out what would, in my mind, would be necessary for that to occur, and share it with the world, and hope in some way that might help people to find their own way, in some fashion or another. Because ultimately, society is just an extrapolation or of our own personal relationship with one another. And if we have jealousy and all these other things, envy and greed within our own personal relationships, society is going to reflect that. If I am corrupt myself, within myself, society is going to be corrupt. It can't be any other way. So if I am not corrupt, society and you are not corrupt within yourself, in the sense of what I'm saying, that we're able to not suppress the feelings of the human condition, but actually see them for what they are and accept them and basically let them pass through us, like I said, without harm. And and then establish a relationship that is real, that is not based on images, that we can see one another as being the same. Because we have all those same emotions, except the circumstances are different. We all feel and see things the same way, in a sense of our feelings. Fundamentally speaking, okay, like I said, circumstances are different, right? And that's what also leads to the problems of communications, which is the hardest thing, because people, because it's very difficult to listen as well, because each person doesn't listen with the heart, with the love that I was referring to. Most people listen through the lens of the me, right? The me, which is corrupt by the human condition. It is the human condition. And we're reading things and listening to things through our own image, through the me, which is, like I said, seeing things from a perspective that is from envy, jealousy, and so on, or trying to figure out, or listening from that point of view, doesn't actually make us really listen to what the person is saying. We're just hearing something else a lot of the times, especially when it becomes part of the discussion has to do with us on a personal basis. Then the listening really becomes really difficult. Anyway, I think I went off way too long. Hopefully that made some sense. But anyway, let's go on. I think they're almost finished. I hope. There's only 10 minutes left. I'm sort of tired here. I'm getting tired a little bit. So let's go.
It's really overwhelming. We do have more access to information than ever before, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're getting the most diverse and well-distributed information, right? So I completely empathize with your feeling of being overwhelmed, but you touched upon something that's very important, which is lifting other people while not speaking for them, right? And this actually speaks to one of the themes that I had privilege of presenting in person at Oslo World 2 years ago, which is the core and the periphery, where the core is often a European capital, somebody based in the global north, while talent comes from parts of the world that represent a much larger chunk of the world's population, right? And yet treated as the periphery, the guest. Mm-hmm. How do we overcome this barrier has been my question, all along, whether with music or information that we provide or the art that we produce. How can we become equal partners in this representation? So perhaps, Samsaya, you've had quite a bit of experience with your dual background, being from India, living in Norway, spending time in the US. How do you think festivals and platforms and labels can bridge this gap between the two?
I think realizing, and this comes on an individual level first, realizing, being aware of your privileges, because we all have some privileges. So just, whether that's you have a little time, write a little list of the things that, like, do you have an iPhone? Do you have a computer? Where do you live? Do you live in a city or do you live far from a city? And there's this I think there's online now actually a couple of good lists that you can check out, and Music Norway did one. Now they have Døråpneren, it's called. They have like a privilege checklist. You can check through that, but basically starting on an individual level, figuring that out really helped. That opened my eyes a lot in my situation. But when it comes to festivals, I think we need to ask ourselves, if someone's always the person who's from there, right, and the other one is always a guest, then that's putting people in a box, and you're putting yourself in a box, because you're always going to be the person that's from there. You're never going to get to be a part of the whole world. For instance, I always ask in Norway, I ask people, but aren't you world music? Aren't you a part of the world? Is Norway not a part of the world? Why is certain music part of the world, and then Norway's music is not a part of, like, do you like the whole having these conversations about what does it mean if I am the foreigner always, and if I'm the immigrant, who are you, the other person I'm talking to? We're like labeling each other. So I think labeling, just seeing that it's actually a label. This is what we call people, maybe, and why do we do it? What does it mean? And then I feel like something happens when that happens, because I noticed, because in the beginning I was very much, yeah, you're that, I'm this. When I was growing up, I was very like, I'm an immigrant, I'm an urban immigrant. And then I realized, oh my God, I'm labeling myself because I'm so much more too. I'm a part of something bigger. So I think noticing that on an individual level, and at the same time bringing it to work, take it to work. Are you a booking agent? Ask yourself, what does my booking look like? Are you like, for me as a singer, who am I producing this record with? Am I daring to produce it myself? Am I also bringing in some others that do things a little differently than I'm used to? Also, for myself, I've asked myself, yeah, I want to sing in Hindi. I want to do more Hindi music. And I used to be ashamed of that. Now I feel almost hurt if I talk about it. But when I was younger, I would feel a little bit embarrassed. But why? It's like beautiful, and nobody should be. It's just it's richness, it's wealth to have this, and nobody should have to feel that. And I think just that inspires me to think that every day I can do that at work. I can change it a little bit. And when I come in meetings, sometimes it's hard, but I also, what I go back with it is that I want somebody to come into the door, and when we say get to be human, get to be the full human they are, because I truly believe that the music industry and everyone on this planet, especially during COVID, I think it was an eye-opener for very many people. They were not able to do what they usually did, so they kind of woke up a bit about their situation. First, you get that whole downfall, and then suddenly you realize, wait a minute, what really matters here? And when we go into that zone, we start creating from a new, I think it's a new being, a new human. And I think I'm taking it to that level now, I'm gonna say that, but the new human cooperates. The new human wants each other. They used to say Charles Darwin, I don't know if that they were saying about the theory we learned at school, like survival of the fittest, and maybe we learned it wrong, but I would just bring it back to survival of cooperation. We work together, we're gonna survive this. Climate change, for instance. So there's so many global issues that I can't believe that we can continue in that, where we downsize ourselves, where we, in the sense of humanity, and where we keep separating. I think it's just not viable. It's not going to last. What's going to last is that we figure it out things together. We have these conversations. I love Oslo Work for doing this, Key Change for working with this, because it's so important. And I want to say to everybody who, because I think a lot of people think like, oh, I have to be a minority in some way, like a woman, or whether gender-based or like from a multicultural background. No, everyone has diversity in them. Everyone is a part of this. We can't do it on our own. We need each other. And we need the men also to work with us and see that they have all this diversity in them. And I think this is something we have to do together. So it's like, I think first individual level, then bringing it to work, taking it on the bus. And I'll just say, where I live here, neighborhood, I kind of decided to get into the board of the housing, what do you call it? Borettslag, we call it in Norwegian. and I just thought, we need to know each other, like the neighbors as well. I need to know people and not just say the Indians, the Norwegians, the Somali, like, who are we talking to? This is Miss and who is he? And, and we've started doing that for a year now, and everything has changed. The mood has changed. And I had to start doing it myself. I couldn't just completely go around thinking all the time, everybody's so rude, like, it had to happen on the individual level, and I had to bring it to work, and I had to bring it everywhere I go. So I think it's, in a way, it's really practical what we need to do. It's very something physical you can touch. You can do this. It's like when you hear somebody say something that you notice, this is not right, just try speaking up a little bit. Doesn't have to be aggressive. It can just be, oh, what do you mean? I love this thing. What do you mean? What are you trying? Who are you? What does it mean? I often just ask, what does it mean? Because a lot of the time we figure out, oh, it didn't mean that at all. But they were using that word. And it's quite a racist word. And why were they using? they weren't racist, but they were doing something racistic. Like, I don't even know if it's the right way of saying it, you know? It's so funny. So we kind
Absolutely.
yeah. So just bringing it with us. Yeah.
And sometimes it's about provoking thought rather than, confrontations are always healthy, in my opinion, but sometimes it's even more powerful to provoke someone to think and to rethink how they use language, as you said. And I love how you said diversity is richness, it's abundance. So, hey, if we have one motivation towards achieving diversity, it's that we live richer experiences and richer lives. We know that we're a long way, as both of you said, to get to that in every sector, political leadership to music and art. And, amid this clampdown of freedom of expression, which has accelerated during the pandemic, for me, it was heartening to see that the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to two fantastic journalists from the Philippines and Russia this year. And for me, safeguarding this freedom of expression extends very much to the world of artistic and cultural expression. And so it was such a privilege to listen to the both of you and to get more insight into how, as individuals on a community level where you're living in your neighborhood or on social media and lifting up other artists, we can challenge the status quo and keep these discussions going, keep them alive on how to create better platforms, more engaged platforms where diverse talent can emerge and on an equal footing as full human beings, as whole people, as you both very well expressed. So thank you for inspiring the rest of us who are listening in today to do this, to do our bits, to maintain this momentum so that together we can reach that equilibrium. And of course, many thanks to Oslo World for facilitating this wonderful discussion. I hope the opening concert is an extremely enjoyable one. I'll be missing it, but thinking very fondly about it. Sending much love from Mexico to Norway this early autumn morning. Thank you, ladies. Thank you, Aurora and Sinsaya. You inspire the rest of us.
Nice. So yes, that is the end of the video. I think I made it quite a bit longer than it actually originally is. So hopefully I've inputted some things that may spur some thoughts for you, and yeah, I put my own little contribution to this for whatever it's worth. What else? Yeah, and that's one of the things that maybe I can do, as I mentioned with the membership program. I can, just go into those things that I was sort of referring to, in the sense of, in this particular case, I talked about greed, but if I can speak about other things, other parts of the human condition, that, and how they affect the world that we live in and the world that we built, I could try to do that as well. And for those who are interested, and I know that it's probably, I would think, maybe a minority of people that would be interested, and I'm sure they're not videos that are probably going to take off on these platforms, in the sense of because of the algorithm and so on. And some of them are going to be more difficult than others to listen to. I would imagine, just like the song "Imagine" from John Lennon. Anyway, hopefully this was okay. Have a great day. Take care. Bye.